Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the College Sports Hive. That is Leif and I am Scott Stevens, and we're here to bring you some basketball content on this Monday afternoon. We had a pretty busy week last week of a lot of great basketball games, so we have the results of all of the picks that we made. Tough week for Leif, but he'll get back in the swing of things, no problem at all. I won't hold that over him too high to start off with. Um, so we'll get you those pick results. We'll recap Texas and Villanova game was a great one on Sunday afternoon. We'll also offer up our player performance and our team performance of the week, as well as our current top five, Leaf and I both. Then next up will be a little bit of news, and then we have four extremely good previews for you coming up on Tuesday. It's going to be tremendous games all day. So stuff you don't want to miss for sure in our previews for this week. So we'll start off right there with the results of last week's picks. I went 10-4 on the week to put myself at 14-6 overall, and Leaf had a solid 6-8, and he's 10-10 overall.
I'm just gonna stop thinking too much and picking upsets just to be funny. It was a bad strategy, deciding at the last second to change a few of my picks, and I'm gonna stick with the gut this week. The comeback begins.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what I've done in football. I picked both Auburn and Michigan State to pull upsets this week in football, and neither of those things happened. So we all have those moments where it's like, I have a hunch that this is going to happen, and I'm going to roll with it because it would look so good if I was right. So no biggie there. I'm sure you'll be back in no time.
Sure hope so. That was embarrassing. I didn't like that sub 500 record at all.
Yeah, not something to build off of. That's for sure. That's for sure. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. All right, top five. Let's hear your top five for this week with your five best teams.
I'll start off with a bang. I got Baylor number one. They didn't play Gonzaga this week, which we'll talk about, but I think they were more impressive in their big game this week than Gonzaga was, and they haven't been challenged. And they played an Illinois team that came into the week in the top five. And they came out and they played a really competitive first half, and then the second half they showed their class, dominating a team. They held Ayo Dosunmu, who's a front runner for National Player of the Year, to 6 of 18 shooting, and they won handily. They won that half by 13, 14 points, ended up winning the game by 13, and they just looked phenomenal. Their weakness that we thought was going to be a weakness was interior defense, and they held a dominant center to an awful night. So I'm going to go with Baylor number one. Okay, Gonzaga won't be too far behind. I got them as basically a 1B, but I'm going to put them at 2 here. They're really good, even at not their best game against a really tough West Virginia team. They came out and played well and got the win. At number 3, I've got Michigan State, just because that they've done something. They've beaten good teams, and they've played 5 games and they're 5-0. That is a bigger track record than other teams have, and they beat Duke on the road. Which is a real win, whereas Iowa, who's number 3 in the actual AP poll, doesn't have a win that speaks volumes. At number 4, I've got Houston. They didn't play quite as well this week, but they are undefeated, and they're still cruising along. Really, really good defensive team, and they're kind of banged up, so I'm going to give them a little excuse there. And number 5, I'm going to round out with Iowa because they've looked really good, though they haven't played great competition, and we're going to get the first taste of Luka Garza against quality bigs coming up soon.
I love it. I have Gonzaga Baylor 1 and 2 as well. Pretty much locks there. I actually think, in a way, for Gonzaga, it behooved them to not play Baylor this time, just because Jalen Suggs was questionable and may not be 100% in that one. So I think it might have honestly been a good thing for Gonzaga to not play that game this weekend, even though everyone wanted to see it. It was going to be a tremendous game. We were very sad that didn't take place. I also have Iowa at number 3. I just think Luka Garza is one of the better players in the country. I know they haven't necessarily played great competition, but whoever they have played, they've handled. So I'll stick with them at number 3. Like you touched on, Michigan State's been very impressive, so I have them up at number 4. And then rounding out my top 5 are your boys and Houston. So I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength, just a little bit different order for those 5 teams. All right, let's hear your team of the week. You seem to have a couple.
Well, yeah, no, if I had to choose, I'd go with Baylor. They only played the one game and they beat a top 5 opponent. But I want to just say the top 4 teams that are like some of the best teams on paper in the Big 12 really showed that out. All of them had weeks that were really great. Texas won the Maui Invitational. They ended up losing to Villanova, and I would have had Texas had they won that game. I was even like planning on that as that game went. I was like, oh, Texas is going to be my team of the week. And they ended up blowing that one. So I wanted Baylor and Texas as my 2. But West Virginia, even in a loss to Gonzaga, showed some things that really showed some signs. And then Kansas toughed out some wins. And sometimes a pretty win against bad opponents doesn't say as much as when you're playing poorly and you can grit out some wins, even against a team as talented as Kentucky or North Dakota State, who they both had tough wins over.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off of what you just touched on. My team of the week is in fact Kansas. They did beat that Kentucky team in the Champions Classic game. It was a heck of a win, tough fought. We've touched on they're having some issues in their recruiting process. They don't necessarily have as much talent as they usually do with that blue blood program, but they're still they were able to win that huge game. Kentucky's kind of on a slide, which we'll get to. But with that being said, they also followed that up with 2 more wins this week over Washburn, and then a squeaker. They barely pulled it out over North Dakota State, but they were able to hold on and get the win. And we'll find a lot. We'll find out a lot about this team when they play Creighton this week in their huge matchup that we'll have a preview for later on. A top 10 matchup there for Kansas. So they're my team of the week this week, but kind of piggybacking off of your performances out of the Big 12. All right, let's bring it more to an individual level now and tell me about who stood out for you and individual performances.
I'm going to go with Marcus Carr of Minnesota. He's been phenomenal throughout this season. He's averaging 26.5 points, 4.3 rebounds, and 6 assists. So that of its own is really impressive. But in this past week, he had a game winner on the first game of the week against Loyola Marymount. In that game, he had 26 and 7. And then he followed that up with a 17.9 assist performance for another win for the undefeated Golden Gophers. And he's really the heartbeat of that team. And I think that he's one of the top 7 players in college basketball so far. He's certainly in the upper echelon. He's what drives the Golden Gophers to success. Without him, they're not a very good team. And with him, they have a chance to compete against anyone.
I love that. I'm going to go with Georgia Tech's forward Moses Wright. Georgia Tech actually beat Kentucky by 17 the other day. A very impressive win for that program, and they were led by Moses Wright. He had 21 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and 2 steals and 3 blocks. So he filled up the stat sheet, pretty much every category you can have for individual stats. He was there in some capacity, leading this team to victory over Kentucky, who we've touched on is uberly talented, just not really gelling as a unit right now, which transitions us beautifully to one of the next topics I have on the docket is what's happening down there with Kentucky after this 17-point loss. They're now 1-3 on the year.
Well, I think they always are better at the end of the year, and we should expect the same. But 1-3 is historically bad down in Lexington. They're having real issues offensively, and I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is point guard play. Devin Askew was a top 25 recruit, but he also reclassified up. So he could be a senior in high school right now. And without the preparation that Kentucky would typically have of a full summer, and even some of the players leaving their high school in the spring in order to play over the spring and summer, they had coronavirus to deal with, as did everyone. But it shows up even more in the less mature teams. And the fact of the point guard being the most important player on the floor, with the point guard struggling as much as he is, I think it really exacerbates the issues that Kentucky's having on the floor. A lot of organizational silly turnovers and then just poor shooting. I don't think will continue, but I don't think they're getting the best shots because of some inexperience and settling on the whole team's part. But I think the point guard plays a big factor in that. So look for them to try to fix that.
2 games that didn't happen that we actually picked in our last preview episode were North Carolina State taking on UConn. And then, unfortunately, like we touched on earlier, the number 1 versus number 2 matchup between Gonzaga and Baylor did not happen. What kind of took place here as to the reasonings of the cancellation?
Well, both of them had to do with coronavirus, of course. A couple bench players for Gonzaga, players who don't really get into the rotation, tested positive, and the main contributors were tested negative. but there was a little too much of oh boy, like could that have just been too soon for symptoms to show up for some of the other players, and it was better suited not to play the game. As sad as it was, I woke up that morning super excited to watch, and like about 10 minutes later got an alert, and I was like, oh, this game's canceled. Oh, that's beautiful, but I think it was the right decision, and they are talking about making this game happen at another point, especially because Gonzaga is canceling a few of their games due to this, and their next game would be against Iowa at December 19th, but that would be more than the 2 weeks, so there should be some time slotted in if Baylor has time in their schedule that they could play another game. So don't lose hope that we can see this 1 and 2, and I still do expect them to be 1 and 2 in the rankings by the time that they end up playing.
Yeah, like we touched on, this is a potential national championship matchup. We do believe these are the two best teams in the country, so very disappointing to see it not come to fruition on that Saturday afternoon. But like we touched on, it was the right call. Just too much speculation swirling around all of that, making sure that the health of the players is paramount, and the most important thing is always the right move. So I do appreciate that, but like we said, we were both pretty sad when that matchup didn't come to fruition. Like you touched on, they have canceled a few games, and that will be a huge matchup with Iowa on December 19th for them to come back to after missing a couple games. So look for a couple more big games out of Gonzaga in the next few weeks. But with that being said, they're on hold for a little bit as of right now. Another game that was canceled that's going to take place tomorrow is Louisville and Wisconsin. So that was a Big Ten ACC Challenge game. It's just coronavirus again in that one?
Yeah, so Louisville stopped activity briefly. They canceled another game, and they had until yesterday, which was 24 hours prior to tip-off, to say they were good to go, play the game, or they were going to cancel. And eventually the Big Ten and ACC decided that it was better not to play that game and postpone to another time, because the Big Ten ACC Challenge is a challenge between the conferences. This game will be rescheduled, assuming that there's a time to do it that works before conference play starts up. And because they have to see who wins between the Big Ten and the ACC. The Rhode Island stepped in and is playing against Wisconsin, but they're not in the Big Ten or ACC, so that doesn't actually factor in, but it's just another good game, a good filler game because of a quality Rhode Island team. And I think I really hope that the Louisville team's all right, because they got off to a really good start and were surprising.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. UConn has also canceled their. I lost my place. Hang on, 1 second. UConn has stopped their actions due to the cancellation there with their game that was supposed to take place over NC State, and we have some interesting news with the nephew of Jay-Z. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so Neziah Carter, guard for Washington, who's a really good athlete and is integral to their team. He was suspended by Washington, and the suspension was upheld. There's not too many details, but the rumor I saw, and actually not rumor, it's been confirmed that there are 2 sexual assault allegations on him. Neither have been confirmed, but the suspension has been upheld. So we'll keep you posted as we learn more about that, but that is not good news at all, not only in the basketball sense, but that Washington team is really bad, and he's probably their best player. So that doesn't help.
Yeah, some tough news there for Washington. They've had a tough start to their year, and this is certainly not going to be helpful for them, losing one of their better players. And also just disappointing to see this happen to a young kid who's trying to build himself a career there at Washington. So tough news, and we'll keep you posted on what's happening up there with the Huskies in terms of Naz Carter. With that being said, we'll transition into our recaps. We actually only have one for this Villanova, and that was number 12 Villanova traveling to number 17 Kansas. We would have recapped Baylor and Gonzaga, but that didn't happen. So we only have this one to recap for you. Villanova did end up winning the game by a total of 68-64. A little bit more defensive, at least than I imagined. I know Texas plays super fast. They play very aggressive defense, so I'm not necessarily surprised they didn't score more. But I just thought they would get out and run a little bit more than they did, and I think they did that in the beginning of this game. They were able to get out and run, and we saw them go on a pretty substantial run. But then Villanova kind of made the adjustments that they needed to, and were able to slow down the pace and be able to hit the shots to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think Villanova just played their game better than Texas executed what their game plan should have been. There was a point in this game where we were talking that Texas could have busted the game open. It was 27-20, I believe, for Texas, and they had all the momentum. And they had Colin Gillespie, the best player for Villanova, had 2 fouls, or most important, I should say. I don't know if he's the best player. Jeremiah Robinson Earl may have a claim to that one. But Texas went away from Matt Coleman. Matt Coleman was the best player on the floor, regardless of team, in that first half. And they absolutely went away from him until the last 2 minutes of the game, where they were just desperate to try to tie the game up. And I think that was a big mistake. They didn't play through their heartbeat of their team and didn't use the athleticism and speed of their team. And Villanova was able to claw back into that game, go up 2 entering halftime, and you're like, oh, okay, whatever, that's still a game. But that was big because Texas really had a chance to open up a substantial lead and play their pace, while the control of Colin Gillespie as the point guard of Villanova was out of the game. And I thought that was a missed opportunity. And then they also just I thought it was interesting to see that they didn't attack the pick and roll. Villanova switches everything. And so that means you've got Jeremiah Robinson Earl as center, or Eric Dixon, who came as the backup center, on Matt Coleman, who's extremely fast. And yes, Villanova was well coached defensively and controlled the pace well in the game. But that means you've also got a center on a point guard on the other side. And they only off the top of my head, I only saw them attack it 2 or 3 times the entire game. So I thought that was interesting. And I thought Jay Wright put a master class of coaching, and Shaka Smart, fresh off a Maui Invitational, got outclassed a little bit in coaching.
Yeah, you look at the numbers on this one, they're pretty dead even. Texas shot 45% from the field. Villanova shot 42.9, so let's just call it 43. Pretty even spread there. Rebounds were in favor of Villanova, but that was only 34-33, so dead even there as well. 12 turnovers for Texas, 9 for Nova. 18 fouls for Texas, 14 for Nova. And then both teams shot 31% from 3. One of the stats that stood out to me is that Texas only shot 6 free throws in this game and only made 3 of them. So, and when Villanova shot 19 and made 14. So pretty. You break it down. Texas lost by 4. A lot of that can be said is, where was the aggression that we saw in the Maui Invitational, taking the ball to the basket, drawing fouls, and all of that good stuff, and not shooting those free throws, because there's 11 points there that Villanova got just on free throws alone.
And I mean, they should have no reason to be out rebounded. Their front line is more athletic than anyone in the country. I mean, they've got Jericho Sims as center, Greg Brown, power forward, Kai Jones on the front line, and they have incredible depth. And they were out rebounded by a team that's relatively small, very well coached, but relatively small. And then at 57-57, with about 2 minutes to go, they lose track of the best shooter on the Villanova roster, and Cole Snyder, let him have a wide open 3 and followed up with a turnover that leads to a dunk. So I just think that in crucial moments, it showed that the Villanova culture, honestly, I thought that they showed that, hey, we've been there and done that. And Texas showed some inexperience in it. Yes, they won a 2-point game against Carolina, but they were winning that game by a lot the entire time, and they just happened to have the ball at the end. It wasn't close for most of the game. And in the close game, Villanova showed their class, and Texas showed their inexperience in playing the big boys in close games. And I think that was the difference in the game. But overall, I came away excited for this Texas team to play a Villanova team that is kind of near their ceiling. Texas is just scratching the surface. And if they learn to play those type of games, they could really make some noise in the Big 12 as well as in the national scheme.
Yeah, we both picked Texas in this game, so we did say it's hard to pick against Jay Wright, and he proved us wrong in this one with Villanova getting the win, 68-64. But I think Texas, like you touched on, has a long way to go here. They're a team that no one really wants to play. They're super athletic. Matt Coleman is a stud, and they're gonna be only getting better from here, I think, under Shaka Smart. So tremendous game that took place there on Sunday afternoon. Like I said, number 12 Villanova did beat number 17 Texas 68-64, and interestingly, both teams moved up in the rankings after this one. Texas up to 13, and I believe Villanova is in around 8. So some really good stuff there from both teams in this one. With that being said, no further ado, we will preview some incredible matchups that we have for you this weekend. We're gonna jump right into number 3 Iowa taking on number 16 North Carolina in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. What do we make of this game, as seeing it's pretty much Iowa's first big test against a team with some national notoriety?
Yeah, this is a crazy good matchup. Just on an individual standpoint, you got Luka Garza battling against the bigs of North Carolina. They always have bigs, and typically they play two. This year is no different. In fact, they have four that are starting caliber bigs, led by Garrison Brooks, who averages 12 points and nearly 9 rebounds. And then they have Armando Bacot, who is about 11 and 8. And so Luka Garza has faced a lot of teams where he's just physically dominant. That won't be the case necessarily here. He'll have to earn these points. And this game is incredibly interesting because Iowa hasn't been a name brand team, and right now they're sitting at number 3 in the country, and number 16 North Carolina hasn't played particularly well, but they're North Carolina. They're known for having bigs who rim run, who battle and rebound incredibly well. And here we have Iowa, who has one player that is extremely good and a lot of really talented supporting cast players that just haven't faced any of the athleticism that they're about to face in North Carolina. Whereas North Carolina just played maybe the most athletic team in the country in Texas. So this will be a really interesting test for both teams, and a litmus test for where Iowa is actually and where Carolina can improve, because they showed some deficiencies even in games they won at the Maui Invitational.
Yeah, I think one of the huge things here is who establishes their bigs earlier on in this game. That's gonna. I think you've told me and personally that you think it's gonna be a little bit more faster paced. I agree. The rim running here is gonna be huge. Which guy can get up and down the floor, establish himself, and make a difference. What do we need to see out of Iowa to kind of solidify them as this number 3 team in the country?
I think they need to be able to be close to rebounding. I don't think they're going to win the rebounding battle against North Carolina. Very few teams do, but they need to be able to be close within a puncher's chance of getting even in that, because Luka Garza can't get all the rebounds himself. And then also, I think North Carolina is probably going to have to double against Luka Garza, keep their guys out of foul trouble. They need to hit some threes from the perimeter, and they have really good shooters, but they haven't had to do so this season because of the teams they've played. They haven't played a ton of minutes with their starters on the floor. So the guys like Jordan Bohannon, who's a fifth-year player who's coming off a medical red shirt last year and is one of the all-time Big Ten three-point leaders, needs to show that. He needs to hit all his threes. Joe Wieskamp, Connor McCaffrey, and C.J. Frederick are all really good shooters, probably the best shooting team on paper in the Big Ten and one of the best in the country. But they haven't shown that so far this year, so they need to show their value as shooters spacing around Garza in this game in order to beat North Carolina, who is incredibly athletic and long on defense.
What does North Carolina have to do to kind of even the balance here and compete with this team who's got all the talent?
Well, I think the key starts with limiting Luka Garza, and they have the ability to do so with the bigs they have. And then as for their offense, they need to be able to push the ball and get into the paint to get against the Iowa zone. Iowa's not an extremely stingy defensive team typically, and I don't think they have the makings to be this year, but they do look better. They look improved that way from what I've seen, and North Carolina has shot really poorly from the outside. So against the zone, typically what you need to do is get into the teeth of the defense, kick out, and hit some threes. So if North Carolina is unable to do that, it might be a long day. And then they need to attack the offensive glass as they always do, because zones are susceptible to offensive rebounding, and you don't want to be susceptible to letting up rebounds against a North Carolina team that will rebound extremely well. So if they rebound well and shoot better, they don't have to shoot great, but better, they really have a good chance in this game.
Let me set you up for your favorite thing. What's the individual matchup to watch here? Is it just big on big?
Yeah, no, I think it has to be Luka Garza versus the bigs of North Carolina. It's so important. If Luka Garza puts up 20, but he has to take 20 shots to get there, I don't think Iowa wins this game. But if Luka Garza is efficient and passes out of some doubles that North Carolina will show, then they have a really good chance. Whereas if North Carolina can limit him and use their 4 bigs to tire him out, they've got a really good chance. One sneaky one is the veteran guards of Iowa versus the freshman backcourt in North Carolina. That obviously, like we talked about Kentucky, it's hard to be a point guard controlling the reins of a team when you haven't had the camp. So Caleb Love is a 5-star point guard, but he hasn't played beautifully yet. He's averaging about 11 points and 3 assists. And typically Carolina, when they really compete, have a guard like Kobe White who averaged about 16 and 6. So we'll see how that one goes as well. Veteran versus a freshman, but super talented versus kind of an injury-prone guard.
it's going to be a good one for sure between number 3 Iowa and number 16 North Carolina in this matchup taking place tomorrow. Some real legitimacy on the line here for the number 3 team in the country in Iowa and North Carolina, kind of looking to build some more confidence in early on in their season after some shaky performances and being beaten by Texas and things like that. So a really interesting one here for both these teams, a lot on the line and a huge matchup early on in the course of this season, and one of the better ones in the Big Ten ACC Challenge that's always produces tremendous games and tremendous talent. All right, let's move on to number 8, Creighton, taking on number 5, Kansas. Talk to me about Creighton. They're 3-0. You have written down they haven't beaten anybody, but what do people need to know about this Creighton team?
Well, Creighton is really fun to watch. They shoot. They shoot so many threes. They play a 5-out. They play small ball and shoot the ball well. Defensively, they're typically not very good, but they, if you can outscore people shooting threes and they have to shoot twos, that typically plays in your favor. At least that's their thought process. And Greg McDermott over there is a really fun head coach. He's the dad of Doug McDermott. And they're an interesting team. They're led by Marcus Zagorowski, who's the Big East Player of the Year. He was voted to be the favorite as the Big East Player of the Year over Colin Gillespie and Jeremiah Robinson Earl. So he's a really good player. And they have a supporting cast. They've got 6 guys averaging 10 points per game so far, or more. So that they've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of shooters. They're very small though, so it'll be very interesting to see how Kansas, who has a big guy in McCormick, but they seem to like to play small ball as well, handles this matchup. Do they cave in and play small ball against Creighton, who's kind of been the ones who started small ball in college basketball, or do they try to establish their big in McCormick? And I think that's one of the bigger matchups in this game.
Yeah, we have this Kansas team who's now 4-1 in their year. They lost to Gonzaga, and then we touched on that win over Kentucky. Who's now 1-3, and then like we said, Washburn and barely beating North Dakota State in this one. They're up to number 5 in the country right now. Do you kind of agree with that ranking, or would you have them a little bit lower?
I think I have them low. I think that their resume would allow them to be number 5, but I have them lower just because I think their ceiling is lower than a lot of these other teams, and they haven't blown out teams. They beat Washburn pretty badly, but they eked by North Dakota State, and in fact, Creighton played the same North Dakota State team and won by more points. So I don't know. I think they're both kind of around the 8 to 10 range if it were up to my judgment, but they've won games, and you got to credit Bill Self for winning some games in some tough conditions, especially because Marcus Garrett in some of these games has been under the weather. And that's a really important piece of that team. So, if you win some, I mentioned this about Michigan State and I mentioned this about Kansas, is when you win, and Gonzaga, even when they didn't have Suggs, is when you win games when you're not at your best, that really helps you throughout the year. And I think that builds some character, and it should go somewhere in the ranking process.
Do you think Kansas kind of errs on the side of playing small against Creighton, or do you think they try and really dominate inside with McCormick?
I think they're going to try initially, at least, to go through McCormick, because there's no one in that starting lineup that has a semblance of a chance of battling with him in the post. It's just a matter of him making some shots. And then I think that if they play inside out, that'll help their shooters, Christian Braun and Ochai Agbaji especially. And then Jalen Wilson's been excellent, but him playing center against a team where they play small ball anyway is kind of an interesting thought. And so I think they at least try to go big initially.
Yeah, I would kind of agree. I think that would give them a huge edge in the rebounding department. I think that's going to play a huge factor in this. If they can get some offensive boards and get some second chance points against a team that shoots as well as Creighton does, I think that would be a huge potential plus for this Kansas team. What else do you make of this matchup?
I think it's a really intriguing matchup in the point guard department. I think Marcus Garrett, assuming he's kind of back to more of who he is as a player, he was visibly shaken against Kentucky, and he was really not able to play his best. Versus Marcus Zagorowski is a really intriguing matchup. I think Creighton's got to shoot well, obviously, to have a chance, and I mean, that's what their MO is, so that's the thing. But I think they need to not let the athletes of Kansas, who they aren't used to playing those type of athletes. In the Big East, a lot of those teams are like the cream of the crop in the Big East is Villanova. But Villanova isn't overly athletic or imposing, whereas Kansas has ton of really good athletes led by Marcus Garrett, and that matchup between Marcus Garrett and Marcus Zagorowski is incredibly important. And then I think they have to rebound better than they typically do against Kansas, especially if they're going to play David McCormick inside. And then the one thing for Kansas, I would say, is can they get some transition baskets against a fast-paced Creighton team? Because if they play fast-paced but they don't push the ball because they want to slow, I think Kansas has the athletes that you might want to push.
Yeah, it's gonna be tremendous to see kind of these contrasting styles come to fruition on the court, and see who's able to use that to their advantage and have the edge in this one. It's like we said, that's number 8 Creighton taking on number 5 Kansas. Do you have anything else to say before we head out on that one?
No, I think we covered it. That's a really intriguing matchup, contrasting styles, and it's a Midwestern battle. Those don't happen too often. That's not even part of that's a Big 12, Big East battle, not the Big 10 ACC for that one. So that's part of another challenge, and keep track of those. I wonder who wins all those conferences, because some of these conferences are extremely deep.
Yeah, they're loaded for sure. And speaking of intriguing matchups, they just keep coming for us on this preview episode. We're traveling back to the Big Ten ACC Challenge with number 6 Illinois traveling to number 10 Duke. We've touched on the Michigan State and Duke game early on in the season. What does Duke have to kind of do to avoid losing 2 at home to Big Ten schools?
Well, I think it starts and stops with Jalen Johnson. He needs to not get in foul trouble early on. I think that ruined the rhythm that they had against Michigan State. If I remember correctly, they were up 18-9 in that game early, and Jalen Johnson goes out of the game, and it was like a 45-23 run. After that, not all of that he was out, but that was the catalyst for it. So he's got to stay out of foul trouble, as he's an anchor defensively, and he's what gets them going offensively. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then they need to rebound the ball better. They stayed within 6 against Michigan State on the glass, but Illinois has bigs in Georgi Bashajashvili and Kofi Coburn who will punish you on the glass if you don't rebound very well. And Duke seems pretty set on playing Matthew Hurt as their center. So that's a give and take. Matthew Hurt's going to draw Kofi Coburn outside of the paint. But that said, Kofi Coburn should punish him on the inside. So Duke will have to hope Matthew Hurt has a really good game from the perimeter in order to beat this Illinois team.
Illinois 3-1 on their season. They're averaging 91 points per game. Ayo Dosunmu is one of the best players in this game, period, probably in the country as well. He's averaging 24, 7, and 6 per game. What does he have to do to kind of ensure that he's a difference maker in this matchup?
I think he had a really hard time against Baylor due to their exceptional perimeter defense and the multitude of players they could put on him that would trouble him. I think he has to get into the paint, get himself some easier shots earlier in the game, and take it to Duke. He's a veteran guard, and their backcourt for Duke is very young. They got DJ Stewart and Jeremy Roach, who are freshmen, and I think he as a junior should have some, and an exceptional player should have some really real advantages there. One other thing I forgot to mention about Duke that just popped in my head about what they need to do is they need some more production from their backcourt. They have Wendell Moore, who is a really touted player as a sophomore returning, and then DJ Stewart and Jeremy Roach have all struggled. They've been silent in some of their games. Even against Bellarmine and Coppin State, they didn't look phenomenal. So that's a really important thing in this game, is whose guards can help the big players, and excluding Ayo Dosunmu. If some other players on that team can play, the supporting cast members will determine this game very, very much so, in my opinion.
Would you give that edge kind of to Illinois or more so Duke?
I think it's pretty close in this one because you have guys that are young on both sides, like Adam Miller and Andre Corbello are both freshmen for Illinois as well. I don't think they have to shoulder the same load that the guys at Duke do. So I might give a slight edge to Illinois, but I think talent-wise it goes to Duke. And Wendell Moore has been there. He's played in big games. He's a sophomore. He's the best supporting player on either team. So if he plays well, then I think Duke has a really good chance. But so far, he's just looked out of sync, and so is the Duke offense as a whole. They don't really have a pick and roll game because they don't have a roll guy like they typically have. They have Zion Williamson, Marvin Bagley, And this year they don't have an elite finisher at the rim. Jalen Johnson's more of their point forward, and then they don't have they're kind of five out. They look stagnant, and then all of them are learning how to play together. And I think Illinois is more well-founded in their roles in a team. So I think that may help, but I don't know. This is one where whoever supporting cast plays better to me wins this game, and it's yet to be determined who has a better supporting cast.
Right. We touched on how big rebounding is in this one. It's going to be a huge determination of who's able to win the game. Have you kind of noticed that Duke's trying to play a little bit smaller?
Yeah, Matthew Hurt at the center is a lot smaller, and that puts a lot of impetus on Jalen Johnson to clear the glass, and they need to rebound well to battle with Illinois, who's got two very competent bigs. And I think they're trying to go smaller, and so Hurt can hurt centers from the perimeter, but I think it's kind of impacted them on the other side of the ball too. So it'll be interesting to see some of the adjustments, because they do have the bodies on their roster. Like Mark Williams is a 7'1" freshman, and Patrick Tape is a transfer from Columbia, who are big guys who could really battle with Coburn a lot better than Hurt can. But I think they're pretty set on playing smaller than they have in past years.
Yeah, it's going to be a tremendous matchup again. These Big Ten ACC challenges just continue to produce these tremendous matchups early on in the year. That is number 6 Illinois traveling to number 10 Duke, trying to be the second Big Ten school to take down the Blue Devils in Cameron. So a tremendous game there as well. And then we have one final game to preview for you all. It's just they keep coming. This is another top 20 matchup. We just touched on Michigan State and their win over Duke. They're now traveling for another huge game against number 18 UVA, who's been that's the University of Virginia. They've been kind of quiet so far this year. They lost a game early, and they seem to be coming back from that a little bit. And what do we make of this matchup between a Michigan State team who we said is 5-0 and they've looked good against a UVA team that might be struggling a little bit, but on the rise again?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think, in my personal opinion, I think that Tom Izzo and Tony Bennett are two of the best 3 coaches in the country. So that's just an intriguing battle in and of itself. And intriguingly, in this one is Michigan State's had Virginia's number recently. They've eliminated them in 2 March Madnesses, 2014 and 15, I think. In both years, Virginia was the higher seed, and Izzo outdueled Bennett. And I think that's something that will be really interesting. And I know that the Virginia team is extremely motivated to get off that schneid. And then as for basketball-wise, Michigan State looked great against Duke for a stretch, but their offense wasn't amazing in that. And then they've played Notre Dame in the other bigger game that they've played. They played a phenomenal stretch with a 26-0 run that capped it. But then against smaller teams, they've been a little lackadaisical. And Virginia hasn't played any big teams. They lost to San Francisco, who is a good basketball program and have a really good coach, but they haven't played any team with the athleticism of Michigan State. So I think that's the first thing, is who can win the pace battle, because Virginia plays remarkably slowly. That's the trademark. And Michigan State, after every made basket or missed, they run the ball at the floor. So there's a give and take in this game, and I think whoever wins that battle wins the game. And Virginia's defense is a work in progress, because they play a pack line defense and they have a lot of transfers. So as a veteran team, you typically expect them to be very sound on that side of the ball, but they're still learning the program. Like the pack line defense has a lot of layers of complication, and they don't look as stout as they typically do. But that said, Michigan State doesn't look as good as they have offensively, because they lost Cassius Winston, who was the best point guard in college basketball for the last couple of years. So this is a really intriguing matchup that I wonder how it plays out on stylistic differences.
What do we make of Virginia and what they're trying to do on the offensive side of the ball?
Well, yeah, Virginia typically has run a blocker mover, which is, for those of you who don't know, it is a set where the big guys on the team typically are the ones setting screens, and they stand that they're the blocker. And the mover is a wing cutting on the baseline around some down screens and catching to shoot. This offense typically needs some really dynamic scorers and shooters. And they do have the shooters, but I don't know if they have the athleticism to become off of these curls. Like Kyle Guy was the one who made the blocker mover work so well for Virginia. And he was exceptional at shooting, but also the speed at which he came off curls, Virginia lacks this year. and they've been trying to incorporate a motion 5-out kind of read and react offense. And when you try to incorporate something new in early games, it's experimental. And I think that's the reason they lost to San Francisco more so than anything. But you don't really have time this year due to lack of preparation and lack of time due to coronavirus. And Michigan State's not exactly an easy team to score on, as Duke showed that it was very hard to score on Michigan State. And so I think Virginia is going to hope this game is a very low scoring game in order to win this game.
What do we think that Michigan State has to do from outside, from the perimeter, to shoot the three ball against this pack line defense that Virginia is implementing that doesn't really allow too many drives?
Yeah, exactly. You have to shoot well against this team because that's their whole premise, that they want you to be able to you have to make threes over them in order to beat them. So I think Michigan State needs to get some transition baskets first and foremost before the defense is set. And secondly, they need to just drive and kick and hope for a nice shooting performance from Aaron Henry in particular. He's been a little off shooting the ball, but he's had some really good drives. And in this game, you have to be shooting well. Rocket Watts has to use his speed to penetrate some gaps and get into the middle, which is so hard to get into, typically from Virginia. And then you've got to clean the glass. I think they need to be dominant on the boards like they typically are and be aggressive on the offensive boards, because Virginia isn't as good at defensive rebounding as they have been in years past. It used to be 30 seconds of defense and out. They'd play and nothing fired up John Paul Jones Arena where this is being played, like a shot clock violation or a bad shot with 1 second, which became so common, and now there's no fans there. So that'll also be a real interesting environment for this game, because this would be not a rivalry game, but something of a big game for both programs.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here in this one between Michigan State and Virginia. Any final thoughts on this game before we move on to our Elite Eight?
I think I'd be remiss to not mention that the Hauser brothers are bashing. They're getting the first game they've ever played against one another, ever, is what I've heard. So Joey Hauser is averaging about 14 points and 10 rebounds for Michigan State, and Sam Hauser is averaging about a little over 14 points and 7 rebounds. And you'll see them matched up against each other occasionally, and I think whoever has a better game of those two really has a good chance of leading their program to a win. So what better than a brother rivalry to be my matchup of the game? So I had to mention that one in there.
Tremendous. You can't make that stuff up. That's an intriguing stat line for everyone to follow along to. That brother sibling rivalry there. Can't imagine the fire to go out and play against your brother for the first time. It'll be truly, especially in a game like this between Michigan State and Virginia. So another huge clash in the Big Ten ACC Challenge, which has just produced 3 tremendous matchups this week that we have had the pleasure of previewing for you. With that being said, we'll slide on into our Elite Eight of the week, where we'll pick 8 games. And yeah, we'll start things off with that number 8 Creighton team taking on number 5 Kansas. Who do you have in this one against the Big East Big 12 matchup?
I've got Kansas. I think one of the bigger things in my mind is that they're battle tested. They've played some close games, and they've played the elite talent of Kentucky, even if it hasn't manifested into great results. They've played against that type of talent. So a big game is nothing unfamiliar to this team. We've talked about how they're not as talented as they are, but they are the more talented team in this matchup, and they're a veteran team too. So I don't think that the guile of Marcus Zagorowski and all the players on Creighton that have been there for a while will really stump them. And I think they can show off some of their athleticism, and they're a pretty good shooting team too when they have the pieces, and Creighton's not very good defensively. So I'm going Kansas. I think it'll be a close game though.
Yeah, I'm going to go Kansas as well. And just purely because of McCormick in this one. I think they need to dominate inside on the glass, produce some second chance opportunities, have him pretty much dominate this game. And if he can score efficiently and rebound and play hard, I think that gives this Kansas team a huge boost to try and beat this Creighton team that's going to try and run and gun and beat you over the top with 3 balls. So I'm going to go with Kansas, and like we touched on their experience so far playing a few games. So I'll roll with the Jayhawks in this one. Who you got between number 4 Michigan State and number 18 Virginia?
I'm going with Michigan State. I think that they're more battle tested at this point athletically. I think that Virginia has struggled with some teams like Kent State. They went to overtime, and they had some really good speed on the Kent State team, but they weren't as big as Virginia, and that's why Virginia was able to win that game. And even then, Virginia didn't rebound very well. I think there's a lot of moving pieces for this Virginia team, and I really do believe they'll be back in the top 10 at some point in this year because Tony Bennett is an exceptional coach. They'll get their defense together. That's a given. But I'm more worried about their offense at this point. I think there's too many moving pieces for what is usually an efficient offense. If not, they're not explosive, but they're efficient. And I think they're inefficient this year. And Michigan State is a team that, whether they're scoring well, which they didn't against Duke, but they were still able to control that game handily due to pace and rebounding. I think there's fewer moving pieces for Michigan State, and they have better athletes at this point as well. I think Virginia's lacking some athletically, and they need a good game from Trey Murphy. That's another player I didn't mention. He got a cleared waiver at the last second. And I think there's just too many moving pieces for Virginia. I expect this to be a really competitive game, but I've got Michigan State. I think they're just more ready as we speak.
Yeah, I'm going to go Michigan State and Tom Izzo as well in this one. 5-0 coming into this game. Virginia's kind of looked shaky at times. I do know that Virginia is going to pull it together, and they're a tremendous team. They have talent on both sides of the ball, and the styles that they implement do work. So let's not get lost in that. I know they lost a tough game to San Francisco, was it? Yeah, they lost a tough one to San Francisco, but that's not the determination of what this team's capable of. So I would not be surprised at all to see them absolutely in this game, maybe even taking down Michigan State in this matchup. But I'm going to roll with the cohesiveness, like you touched on, with Michigan State and to take the day here against a very good Virginia team that you should not sleep on for sure. We'll take things out of the Big Ten ACC Challenge for just a second and go to a Pac-12 school playing an SEC school. So a really intriguing matchup there. Colorado has some talent on both sides of the ball, and they're taking on number 12 Tennessee. What do we make of this one?
Well, the craziest part of this game is that both teams are coming off of coronavirus pauses, and Colorado's had a few games under their belt. This is Tennessee's first game of the season, and it's not exactly a friendly opener. Colorado's a really good team. Tad Boyle's a really good coach. They've got a point guard, McKinley Wright, who's great. That said, I'm going with the Volunteers. This is one of the teams I'm very high on coming into the season. I would have loved for them to not have coronavirus and play the first 2 weeks of the season in anticipation for this game and down the road by the postseason, because every week matters because there haven't been as many reps. The Volunteers have a really veteran team. They've got John Fulkerson, Santiago Vescovi, and Yves Pons are all really good players coming back, and they bring in a really talented freshman class. So I'm going to go with the Volunteers. I think they've got a really good roster, and assuming that they have all their players playing, which is an assumption at this point, I think they're a more talented team, and they have veterans as well, so that the break doesn't hurt them as much as it would a super young team. So I think it'll be a close game, but I'm going with the Volunteers.
I'm actually going to go opposite you here, just for one reason alone. Is I think McKinley Wright might be one of the best players in the Pac-12. I think he's just uberly talented at point guard. He makes that team go. I expect him to have a really big performance here. But like we said, if they're able to shut him down, I don't really see a way for Colorado to win this game. But I'm going to go with McKinley Wright and the ability to score some points and keep his team in this game and make some shots down the stretch to pull off this, which would be a big upset, especially for a Pac-12 conference that's kind of struggling with where they're at in terms of legitimacy of some of their programs and things like that. And so I think this would be a huge win for the Pac-12 and Colorado. So I'm going to roll with them. They have a lot to play for. But with that being said, Tennessee is also very good. So who knows? I'm just going to go with the upset in Colorado. Another fun one is Indiana and traveling to number 20 Florida State. Who we got in this one?
This is another interesting one because Indiana's had more games under their belt, and Florida State's only played one game since returning from coronavirus, and they look pretty good. They won by around 20 against a decent team in North Florida, I believe. I'm going to go with Florida State. I just believe in what Leonard Hamilton does. I think they wear you out, and they're extremely athletic and really good defensively. And we've seen what that does to an Indiana team. Indiana had major issues playing against Texas. And I think Texas, West Virginia, and Florida State are like kind of three of those teams that any given night they can win a game with their defense. And we saw that Indiana does not shoot the ball well from the perimeter. Florida State has the athletes on the interior, and they press most of the game, and there's some worries about the backcourt of Indiana. So I'm going to go with Florida State and what Leonard Hamilton does. It does bother me that these last two picks, that they're teams I really am high on. Some of my sleeper teams that are ranked but could really compete haven't played though. So I'm going to go with Leonard Hamilton and the Seminoles, but that does worry me because I really like this Indiana team and Trace Jackson Davis.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with Indiana in this one. I think they had a really bad performance against Texas in one of their bigger games of the year, but then bounced back pretty strongly against a good Stanford team for the Pac-12. So this is a huge game for Indiana. I think it's going to determine what they're capable of in this season, and it's a loaded Big Ten. And I think they're one of the teams that kind of falls by the wayside, that has talent and things like that, and just they get slept on a little bit. I'll take Indiana in another upset over Florida State. What the heck? I'm up a couple games on you, so if I lose this one, it shouldn't be a big deal. But I'll start being a little bit more unpredictable and roll with the Hoosiers to take down the Seminoles in this good matchup here.
I like this Indiana team. I really do.
Yeah,
I'm scared about picking against them.
I'm happy about it. I do what they did against Texas scares me, but yeah, they only put up 44 points against Texas. But like we said, Texas is good, so I'll roll with Indiana to have a bounce back performance in this one and kind of solidify themselves. NC State traveling to Michigan, another ACC Big Ten matchup. Who you got in this one?
I'm gonna go with Michigan. I think they're getting better as they go along. They kind of slept on an Oakland team and played a bad game, and it bumped them out of the rankings. But I think they're a team that will be around the top 20, top 25 most of the year. They have really good wing play from Isaiah Livers and Franz Wagner, and then they have a transfer from Wake Forest and Chaundi Brown, who I think is an impactful player. This NC State team has some veterans returning and are good on the interior. But I'm gonna go with Michigan. I think Juwan Howard's gonna lead this team to the promised land in this game at least, and competing in the Big Ten. I'll give him some more credit than that. But I love Isaiah Livers and Franz Wagner, so that's really the reason I'm going with this game. I think they're the best two players in the game. So the best two players, I'm gonna take the best two players to win the game.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Michigan as well. I think it's a game that's I'm not necessarily sure it's gonna be too close. I don't think NC State's going to necessarily be able to hang with what Michigan's had to offer. Also, I picked Michigan last week and they came through for me. So I'll roll with the Wolverines again in this one over North Carolina State. I don't know why I have that feeling that it's not going to be that close, but I'll just roll with the Wolverines.
I think it will be a pretty good game, but I don't know. I agree. I've got the Wolverines though. I do like this team. They're a sneaky team on paper, and if their guard play solidifies, they could be a really good team.
Some other sneaky good teams. There's number 24 San Diego State is taking on number 23 Arizona State. So a really good matchup here. Who you got in this one?
I love San Diego State. I put them as my team of the week a little bit ago. Brian Dutcher, the coach there, they lost a lot. They lost Yanni Wetzel and Malachi Flynn, who was the player of the year in that conference, and it was a first-round NBA draft pick, and they come out and bash UCLA. And then they play another game, and they played a tough Pepperdine team after a break of coronavirus. They had a little pause. I'm going to go with San Diego State. I think that their defense and press will irritate the really talented but still developing Arizona State team. And I think there's just too many bodies and one ball for Arizona State against a really unselfish and well-schooled San Diego State team. So I think their defense will win this game for them.
Yeah, I'm going to go with San Diego State as well. I think Arizona State's a very good team, one of the better ones in the Pac-12. But with that being said, I just think San Diego State's a little bit more complete. I think they're going to be able to put a better performance onto the court. And it's sad because I think this is probably one of the better programs in the Pac-12, but they're still just struggling a little bit. I think they're still a step behind. And I'll roll with San Diego State to pull off this win here. That brings us into our games of the week so far for this week. We have our first one that we're going to do for you is number 16 North Carolina traveling to number 3 Iowa. Who you got in this one? Why? And what's your score?
I've been talking since March when Iowa was the 5th best team in the Big Ten last year, and then I said they'd be a top 5 team. So I think it would be weird if I didn't go with Iowa. So I'm going to go with Iowa. I think that those shooters that I mentioned will have a good game. They're playing in their home confines of Carver Hawkeye Arena. It's a shame there are no fans. They're really motivated. I heard an interview where they think they could be a number one team in the country because they can go beat Gonzaga on December 19th. And if they get there unscathed, they have a legitimate shot, and they're really playing for something. I think Carolina's kind of searching for an identity. They don't really have great wing players. So I'm going to take the supplementary pieces of Iowa's team over that of the Carolina team that's still growing into what they are. So I'm going to go with Iowa, I think around like 87 to 83. A close game. I'm going to go with Iowa. They got some really good free throw shooters. They'll ice this game. So I'm going Iowa.
Love it. I'm going Iowa as well. I think it's a little bit lower scoring, though. I think they play through the bigs a little bit more, Luka Garza and things like that. I'm going to go 71-65 Iowa. I just think, like you touched on, UNC is kind of lacking a little bit of identity in terms of their wings and things like that. And I think just the inability to kind of push the ball down the floor. I don't think North Carolina is going to necessarily be able to win this game with 3-pointers. And I think that's going to be a huge part of this is if they're going to be able to shoot well enough to beat this Iowa team, and I'm not necessarily sure I'm sold on that. So I'll roll with Iowa in this one, and to continue to pretty much prove their legitimacy as the number 3 team in the country with their first true big matchup on the season. All right, with our last pick, we have number 6 Illinois traveling to number 10 Duke. Score, winner, and why?
It worries me to pick against Coach K twice. Well, I picked for him once, but in my head, as I told you, I thought Michigan State was going to win. You tricked me in that one. But anyway, I'm going to go with Illinois. I think that their team has more veterans, and early in the season, it is really important to have those veterans. I also think that Kofi Cockburn laid an egg against Baylor, and that was a testament to Baylor's defense more and him getting a foul trouble early. I think that he's able to establish himself more. They'll dominate the glass. Io DeSumo also played a stinker of a game, and I don't think that'll happen twice. So you got the best 2 players on that team are really looking to prove their legitimacy as a duo. And I think their supplementary pieces are more veteran than that of Duke. So I'll go with Illinois. I'm going to go with 74-70. I think it'll be a relatively low-scoring game initially because both the teams are pretty get up and down and play. But I think Illinois' defense is really legit, and Duke doesn't shoot the ball very well. So I think I'm going to go with Illinois in that because of Duke's inefficiency offensively. One player I didn't mention in the preview, though, is watch for Jordan Goldwire as a senior, a veteran presence on that Duke team to defend Io DeSumo. And if he does well, that really gives them a chance. But I'm going to go Illinois 74-70 over Duke.
I like that pick. I think that's very, very like smart. I think that's a very solid pick. But like you touched on, Duke isn't going to lose twice at home to 2 Big Ten schools. I just don't think it happens. I think Coach Krzyzewski is going to get that team ready to go in this one. A huge part of this, though, is if Jalen Johnson can stay out of foul trouble. If he's on the bench, not able to play with Kofi Cockburn and some of these other people for Illinois and their bigs, I just don't see really a way for Duke to hang around in this game. But I think he plays a smarter game. I also think Coach K realized that he can't necessarily rely on the other parts of his team if Jalen Johnson is out. Because we touched on, Jalen Johnson went out with 3 fouls, and he wasn't really put back into the similar spots to play smarter and to play because he is a freshman, so he's not necessarily trusting him enough to go in with 3 fouls and prove that can be smart and not foul but still play productively and be on the floor. So I think Coach K kind of learned a lesson there, and he will trust Johnson a little bit more. And I'll roll with Duke in this one, 78-71. They don't get beat on their home floor twice by 2 Big Ten schools. Don't love that, though, because I do love this Illinois team and what they can do. So, and I also don't think Illinois is going to lay an egg again like you touched on with Baylor. So I'll roll with Duke, but I'm not really set in stone on that one.
Yeah, and then one other thing I thought of while you were talking about that is I'm sticking with my pick, and no waffling here, but I do think that Duke should expect better performances from Wendell Moore in particular, and that Jalen Johnson can stick out of foul trouble by guarding DeMonte Williams, who's kind of Illinois' glue guy. He doesn't really do a ton offensively. I think Jalen Johnson might play more of a center field role, helping and rebounding, and that could really help this Duke team, obviously, because if he's on the floor, they'll do better. But I would assume that Brad Underwood and Illinois staff have devised ways to attack him, maybe bring in Georgi Bashashvili earlier in the game and play two bigs just so Jalen Johnson has to guard someone and potentially pick those fouls. So that'll be an interesting kind of little X's and O's battle that I think will be indicative of who wins this game.
You make me feel a lot better about my pick this time. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It gives me a little bit more solidarity in what I'm doing here. So I appreciate that. I'll stick with Duke in this one. And that's going to do it for us on this preview / recap episode for your Monday basketball action. That's for here on the College Sports Hive. Once again, as always, that's Leif Tulane, and I'm Scott Stevens bringing you the goods. Do you have anything else to mention before we sign off on this one?
Just that we got a college football episode coming up that'll be jam-packed with news, recaps, and previews. So stay tuned for those, and a college basketball one also to come later in the week, and enjoy the good sports. There have been some great games recently.
Yep, Leif and I are going to take the rest of the day off today and tomorrow. This is finals week for us, and we are college students still, so we appreciate the fluctuation of the schedule. We're going to take tonight and tomorrow off of our podcast, and not our schoolwork. Don't worry, we're good students, we promise. But we'll be back on Wednesday. We're going to have a jam-full football episode. We're going to do recaps from last week, news, and previews for this upcoming week, a week before conference championships. So huge football episode coming out on Wednesday, and we'll be happy to bring that to you as well. So that's going to do it for us this episode. We will see you all on Wednesday, and appreciate the support, and let us know if you need us to preview, recap, anything like that, and we'll see you all on Wednesday.